Do you guys remember when I made that video about how women can't speak in the church? And I just thought that was a little weird. This whole male domineering over women thing just seems strange to me because it's almost like it's forcing women to worship man and all people to worship man rather than God. It's putting man in the position of control and authority instead of God. And before the fall, God ruled over man and woman rather than man ruling over woman and replacing God, which in my opinion is what happened after the fall. But I have something very interesting I'm going to read to you all. Women in the creation and after the fall. Genesis presents gender equality rather than male leadership as humanity's created state. It teaches that man and woman are created equally in the image of God and together have dominion over the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 through 27. Their equality is not limited to spiritual standing before God, but applies to their dominion over the earth. God blessed man and woman and charged them both in verse 28, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over," all the creatures it mentions, "every living thing that moves upon the earth." The structure of the creation narrative climaxes in the creation of woman, fulfilling man's need for a partner corresponding to him. Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 and 20. The text describes woman being created to be the man's Ezer Kenegdo, literally a strength corresponding to him. This is spelled E-Z-E-R space K-E-N-E-G-E-D-O. Unfortunately, the word Ezer, E-Z-R, here is translated as helper, which in English implies a subordinate or servant. You see how the fall really messed that up, and it's the confusion tried to force woman into being a servant to man rather than a servant to God. Never in the Bible, however, does E-Z-E-R, Ezer, suggest helper as in servant, but almost always describes God as his people's rescuer, strength, or might. The most authoritative biblical Hebrew dictionary lists biblical meanings of Ezer as help, assistance, might, and strength, but not helper. 3 times Ezer describes a military protector. Nothing in the context of any of these passages warrants concluding that as Ezer, either God or woman is subordinate to man. The second word, Kenegdo, combines K-E, which is as, and N-E-G-E-D, which is in front of, and O, which is him, and so conveys as in front of him. Nagid, N-A-G-I-D, a noun related to neged, N-E-G-E-D, refers to the person in front and means the one declared by Yahweh to lead. Therefore, like Ezer Kenegdo, is more appropriate to identify a superior or equal rather than a subordinate. Nothing in the expression Ezer Kenegdo in Genesis 2 implies God created woman as a subordinate helper for man. Quite the opposite. It highlights her strength to be an equal partner with man, rescuing him from being alone. She is his counterpart, his companion and friend, who complements him in exercising dominion over the earth. She fulfills him so that together they can be fruitful and care for the earth. Likewise, nothing in the Genesis account of creation grants man priority and status or authority over the woman, but throughout it emphasizes their equality. God makes woman from the man's rib, and the man recognizes, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Genesis chapter 2, verse 23. And may I add, if woman was some kind of subordinate or servant or less than, then she would have been made by something lower than him and not by him directly, closest to his heart. Thank you. Let me continue. I'm going to start over with that sentence. God makes woman from the man's rib, and the man recognizes, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Genesis chapter 2, verse 23. Because they share the same substance. Genesis chapter 2, verse 21 through 23. Father and mother are identified without hierarchical distinction. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. In marriage they are united in one flesh. Both are naked and feel no shame. They share moral innocence. Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. Together they face temptation and disobey God's command. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. They both realize they are naked and sew coverings. Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. Both of them hide from God. Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. Showing they were both ashamed that they had disobeyed God. Both Both of them pass the blame. Genesis chapter 3, verse 12 through 13. God speaks directly to both, announcing specific consequences of their sin. Genesis chapter 3, verse 9 through 13. Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 through 19. Both are responsible for their own acts. Thus, Genesis chapter 2 through Genesis chapter 3 portrays gender equality, not an order of creation that grants men authority over women. Male hierarchy over women is not in God's original design. The first mention of male rule is in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, which identifies it as a direct result of the fall. He will rule over you. Even prominent male hierarchists agree that this is not a prescription of what should be. Like every other result of the fall, it is a negative change. To make this compatible with the theory of male headship in creation, hierarchists say that Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 is about the introduction of unloving rule, not male rule over women in general. The text, however, does not say that only unloving male rule is a result of the fall. It says that male rule itself is a result of the fall. Genesis chapter 3, verse 16 uses by far the most common word for rule, not a word that naturally brings to mind bad rule. The word is even used for God's rule, which is certainly not a bad rule. Both major biblical Hebrew dictionaries analyze every Old Testament instance of this word and list no negative meaning for it. This word does not imply bad rule, but simply means rule. Since man's ruling over woman is itself a result of the fall, man must not have ruled over woman before the fall, because do you know who ruled over them? And who ruled over woman? God. G-O-D. Jesus Christ. The practical result of men ruling over women, even in the best of circumstances, is that women are deprived of the corresponding authority with that men, The practical result of men ruling over women, even in the best of circumstances, is that women are deprived of the corresponding authority with men that God granted them in creation. Furthermore, because of their fallen nature, many men have used their positions of authority to abuse women. Ahem! Christ, the seed of the woman, God promised would crush the serpent's head, has overcome the fall. This promise is stated in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Consequently, we should resist the tragic consequences the fall introduced, including man's rule over women, and not foster them. That is so true. There is this desperate, obsessive, psychotic attempt to force everyone to worship the word of men, and men are seen as more authoritative and more superior to women. And you can say that that's not true. I don't give a shit. And I'm not some psychotic feminist. I'm just going to speak the truth, and you can call me whatever you want if you get if you get offended by the truth. I mean, if you're not a woman, what the fuck would you know about what it's like? And who are you to say? This is it's so. Did you know that back in the day, 2,000 years ago, they used to say that women aren't even worthy of life? And if they wanted to get baptized, oftentimes they'd get the shit beat out of them for even asking. Women are seen as less than, and you can say that's not true, but all of you know it's true. When has there ever been a woman president? Can't let that happen, can we? Right? Don't even play with me. It's so obvious. And it is a result of the fall. And if you get offended by the truth and you don't take a second to accept it, you might want to check yourself, because you will wreck yourself. And you deserve the truth. You deserve pure truth. Maranatha.